Hey everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael and we're going to be getting right back into some more Reddit stories. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe. Now, without further ado, let's begin. This story was posted by a user named Infertile Old Maid in the relationship subreddit. The post is titled, "My husband is leaving me because I'm infertile. I'm an absolute wreck. Countless consultations, too many tests to count, 5 rounds of IVF, months of crying myself to sleep. And now the only source of happiness in my life is gone. The past year has been really difficult for me. Last July, my mother passed away, and it had been her dream to see me, her only daughter, ripe with children. I'm devastated that she didn't get to experience that. To add to that, in November, I was laid off, and now the consequences of that have been coming to a head because my husband and I can no longer afford another round of IVF. We can barely afford my appointments. My husband and I had been dreaming of the good life. 2 kids, a dog, and a pretty little house in the country. All of that came crashing down 2 days ago. He had just arrived home from work and I greeted him with a smile and came towards him with the expectation of a kiss, but he walked right past me. When I turned around and asked him what was wrong, he looked at me somberly and told me to sit down. As I sat, I could feel my heart sinking in my chest, although I didn't know why. He placed a couple of pieces of paper on the table and slid them towards me, then buried his head in his hands and let out what sounded like a quiet sob. I looked down, shaking, and saw that he was serving me divorce papers. Everything after that is a blur. I have memories of him telling me that he loved me and he was so sorry, but that he had been miserable, and if I wasn't able to have a child, he couldn't stay with me. He told me that he was the monster and that he couldn't shake his biological imperative anymore. We'd both agreed early on that if we couldn't have children, we wouldn't adopt because we wanted biological children. He used to hold me at night and tell me that he would never leave me no matter what. That being childless was okay and I was worth it. I now know that was all a lie. I can't blame him though, because it was me who was hindering the relationship. I am the broken one. His sister and best friend came over yesterday to help him pack up his things, and I just lay in my bed and sobbed the entire time. He has rented an apartment on the other side of town and has agreed to pay for our home for the next 4 months until I can find another job and we can sell the house. I'm devastated. I haven't left my bed since the night he left. I haven't eaten anything. I feel like I've already died. What do I do, Reddit? I haven't had the courage to tell any of my friends or family yet because I'm already shamed by them for being infertile. How could he do this to me? My life is over. Update. First off, I'd like to get a few things off my chest about the messages I received regarding my situation. Thank you so much to those who supported me and were kind and sympathetic throughout this. I received many very kind messages of encouragement and love from strangers. That being said, I also got a plethora of messages from people telling me that I deserved everything that happened to me because I refused to adopt. That I deserve a life of loneliness and that I should kill myself. That really sucked and made me want to actually die. I don't think I'm a bad person for not wanting to adopt. I don't think it's wrong to prefer biological children over an adopted child. 95% of the world feels the same way, obviously, because the vast majority of people do not adopt. I believe it takes a brave and very loving person to take on a child that isn't theirs. I am not one of those people, and I'm sorry if that offends you. Now onto the update. The day after my post, I spoke to a lawyer who agreed to take me on as a client. On Thursday, my lawyer and I met up to discuss what I expected out of the divorce. I also spoke to a therapist on Friday. She told me that the best course of action at this point was to take some time for myself and not contact my husband. Over the past few days, I had been thinking about his leaving and the entirety of our situation. I decided that even though I was furious about how he handled it, I could understand his desire to leave. If I cannot provide a child for him, and that is truly what he wants, then he needed to leave. By Friday, I was in a calmer state of mind, although everything was still numb. I couldn't stop replaying in my mind him sliding the papers toward me and then telling me that he loved me but couldn't be with me. It still doesn't feel real. On Saturday afternoon, everything came crashing down again. I was trying to block everything out of my mind by binge watching Netflix when the doorbell rang. My heart tightened as I walked toward the door and opened it to find my husband standing there. He looked terrible, almost worse than I did. Without looking me in the eye, he asked if he could come in, and I couldn't even speak. I moved my body to the side of the doorway and motioned for him to enter. In that moment, it took everything I had not to kiss him and punch him all at the same time. We sat down on the couch together in silence for what seemed like 10 minutes. He finally spoke, and all he said was, "Infertile old maid, I'm so sorry." I remained silent. We sat for about 2 more minutes before I finally had the courage to ask, "Is that all you wanted to say?" He shook his head and began to tear up, which of course caused me to tear up as well. He buried his head in his hands and sighed. He told me that he'd been feeling like he was missing out on fatherhood. I told him through tears that I understood and didn't blame him for wanting children, but he cut me off. He told me that wasn't it at all. He revealed that he'd been seeing a young woman at his work for the past 6 months and that he couldn't keep lying to me any longer. They were having both an emotional and physical relationship, and she had been pressuring him to leave me for a few months. He claimed his insecurities about his lack of a family were pushing him to feel that he needed change and that she was a huge mistake. At this point, I couldn't take it anymore. I told him to get the fuck out of my house. He looked at me like a scared puppy and panicked, telling me that he wanted another chance and that he'd just broken off things with his coworker and was willing to forego kids to be with me. I didn't know what to do, so I just started to scream, yelling at him to get out and that I was completely done. He just began to sob and started pleading for me to calm down. It was clear that he wasn't going to leave, so I did. I grabbed my keys and ran out of the house. I drove for 30 minutes out of town, parked on the side of an empty road, and cried for an hour. Driving back into town, I looked at my phone and saw that my husband had called over 20 times and texted me things like how he was so sorry and that she was nothing. I didn't delete any of these messages because I knew how important they were for my lawyer to see. When I arrived back at my house, he was no longer there. I walked inside and all was the same. He took nothing and broke nothing, which was relieving. I regained my composure and sense of reality and called my lawyer, leaving him a very long message about what had just happened. Today, my lawyer got back to me and told me to come in first thing on Tuesday morning. My husband has not tried to contact me since one last text on Sunday that read, "I love you, infertile old maid. I fucked up and I'm sorry for hurting you. If you ever need me, I'll be here for you." My mind is again in turmoil and I feel like I am dying. I have yet to tell any of my friends and family what has happened and I'm not sure that I will be able to. User Hymentolophus said, "This phrasing really turned my stomach. The way OP describes herself as broken and as an old maid is truly upsetting. She is far more than an incubator, yet it seems everyone around her has convinced her that her only value comes from her ability to reproduce." To this, user Melon of Fury said, "Reading that phrase, I really had to wonder how much of this is conditioning by those around her. She never really spoke about how she felt regarding children, more about how it affected those around her. I hope she gets a chance to speak with someone and really untangle her own feelings on the issue because ripe with children just comes off as culty." A deleted user said, "That husband is a piece of shit. I don't understand what is up with some guys and their need to spread their seed, but he's been messing up this whole time. I hope that stays single and without children. Good on OP for moving forward, but I feel so sorry for all the shit she went through leading up to this." User Buttercup Cake said, "This jerk is beyond awful. Not only did he cheat on her, but he also made her feel like she deserved it for being infertile, all because he was too much of a cowardly piece of shit. I hope he trips and falls into a volcano." This next post was made in the AITAH subreddit by a user named Hot Wolverine. The post is titled AITAH for kicking my son and his GF out. This situation has left me a bit confused, so one of my neighbors suggested I post it here. I'm a 55-year-old female with 2 children, George, 31, and Gabrielle, 29. Gabrielle recently got engaged, and I'm helping her plan the wedding in my spare time, which the entire family is very excited about, except for George. George recently divorced his wife of 7 years, Susanna, 28, after he said the spark had gone out. They have a set of twins together, Amy and Alice, who are 6 years old, and they are trying to establish a healthy co-parenting relationship. Susanna is a great mother to my grandkids, and I was disappointed in George for giving up so quickly on their relationship without even trying couples counseling. However, it wasn't my business or place to say anything. The drama started when George brought his new girlfriend to dinner at my house. He met Bethany, 25, through a work colleague, and they have been dating for 4 months. During dinner, Gabrielle and I were discussing flower arrangements when Bethany felt the need to ask George if he'd ever marry again. George coughed before replying that he'd have to think about it, which seemed to deflate Bethany. This caused Alice to cry about how she wants mommy and daddy to love each other again. George and Bethany just sat there while my granddaughter screamed. After I comforted Alice, I pulled George aside and asked if he was sure about Bethany. He He told me that was none of my business. I replied that it was my business who he invited into my home and my grandchildren's lives, since I've been caring for them in my spare time while he works. George got angry and said it was Gabrielle's fault for mentioning weddings in the first place. I told him to stop acting like a child and to be happy for his sister. Then Bethany felt the need to insert herself into the conversation and told me that she and George were together no matter how much I liked his ex-wife. After that, I was done with the conversation and asked them both to leave. George and Bethany stormed off, flipped me the bird, and left my grandchildren at my house at 7 p.m. I had to call Susanna to collect the children since they had school in the morning, and I was attending a cake tasting with Gabrielle the next day. I feel like I shouldn't have to tell my 31-year-old son to be happy for his sister or argue with a random woman whom I've never met before in my own home. Am I the jerk? Update. I didn't expect this post to gain so much attention, and I want to thank everyone who gave their honest opinions and helpful suggestions. This situation happened a few hours ago, and I thought it was right to provide an update. Bethany came to my house to apologize for how she acted at dinner last week. She told me that she is 2 months pregnant and that George had broken up with her after she told him. He said he has too much responsibility and didn't want to be in the baby's life. I then spent the better part of 3 hours talking with Bethany about the baby and what she wants. She says she wants to keep the baby even if George refuses to be involved, and I told her that I would help with childcare if she needs it since she doesn't have any family living nearby. Before I got angry with George, I thought I would call him and give him a chance to explain. George was angry that Bethany had shown up at my house and insisted that it wasn't his baby. I told him that he should get a paternity test, and he asked me for $500 to cover it since he's struggling. I told George that he needs to figure it out himself since he's about to be a father of 3 and that he better step up and do right by his kids. George then hung up. Well, 2 hours later, I got a call from Susanna saying that George hadn't picked up the kids as he'd previously agreed to, and could she drop them at my place because she had work. I agreed for her to drop off Amy and Alice and tried to call George again. I called 12 times, but they all went to voicemail. I don't know where George is and have called his place of employment to try to find out. However, they refuse to tell me anything. I've agreed to watch Amy and Alice until Wednesday, and Susanna has reported this incident to CPS. I assume she plans to file for full custody, and I can't blame her. Right now, I'm worried that George has run off somewhere or done something irresponsible. I am disgusted and will not be doing him any favors in the future unless he has a very good explanation and accepts some responsibility. This was hard to write, but felt good to get off my chest. Thank you everyone for responding to my first post. User Ansult Goes said, Bethany should not have started that conversation as a dinner guest in your home. It was tactless and impolite of her to put George on the spot in front of everyone else. George is also wrong to blame his sister for Bethany's behavior. More than anything, he is wrong not to be more supportive and loving toward his children who have been through a lot. NTA. I would have told my son to never bring that woman back to my home, never show me his face again, and most of all, to act like his children are his priority. I'm disappointed because your behavior is unmanly. User Tracy Olivia said, you have a bigger issue at hand because Alice will likely hate every new partner, believing in her mind that they kept mommy and daddy from loving each other. Your main focus should be to explain to Alice that grown-ups fall out of love, and it has nothing to do with the love they have for her. It won't be healthy co-parenting if Alice already hates every woman who tries to replace her mom. She needs more attention and perhaps counseling. She had a strong reaction. 2 months later, OP gave us another update. Okay, so I made the original post about 2 months ago, and since then, things have been a bit crazy. I just wanted to update everyone as I had people asking if George was okay. In my first post, people suggested I give George some space and time to figure things out as a recently divorced father. However, after he ran off about 2 months ago, I ended up filing a missing persons report. I talked to George's workplace the day after I filed the report, and they told me he had given his 2 weeks notice about a month ago. I then tried calling George again, and he finally picked up. He told me he was okay, but that he had moved to another state and no longer wanted any contact with his children because it was all too much responsibility for him. I snapped at George and told him he couldn't just decide that he didn't want to be a father anymore. Then George told me he never wanted kids in the first place and that those kids don't look anything like me anyway. He then told me to off and hung up the call. After that, I informed the police department about what had happened so they would know George wasn't in any danger and that we knew his whereabouts. After that conversation, I just cried because I couldn't believe I had raised such a selfish person. Susanna has filed for full custody, and as far as I know, George is refusing to pay child support and will probably end up in jail at some point. Bethany is now 4 months pregnant and is having a boy. George is the father. Somehow, he managed to come up with the $500 for the paternity test, so he will have to pay child support since he doesn't plan on being in the baby's life. Bethany moved into my home in November since she's had trouble doing things herself, and her doctor says she's at risk of preeclampsia if she becomes too stressed during the pregnancy. During this time, we have gotten closer, and despite how our first meeting went, I have actually come to like Bethany. Sorry, this isn't the happy ending some of you were expecting. I have been following the advice I received from my first post and have not contacted George. He has not tried to contact me either. I can only hope that with time, he pulls himself together and manages to step up as a father. Again, thank you to everyone who gave helpful advice. I'm not sure if I will be updating further, however. Update 2. It's been over 6 months since my last update, and I completely forgot about this account. Much has happened in that time, so as requested, here is the update. First of all, Gabrielle is now married to her amazing fiancé, and I couldn't be more proud. The wedding was a small family affair at his parents' farm. George did not attend the wedding, but it was a beautiful ceremony all the same. Bethany has given birth to a healthy baby boy and has found an apartment and a new job. I am so proud of her for how well she is coping with everything. As suggested in my last post, we did get the twins therapy, and it has helped them heal throughout this whole process. After George took off and abandoned his children, our whole family needed time to heal and recover from the hurt and trauma. As for George, that's a messy situation. Roughly 4 months ago, George was found to be in possession of illegal substances and was arrested. When George first called me from the county jail, I thought he was trying to get money out of my husband and me. However, it just got worse and worse. He asked me to pay for a lawyer, and I explained that because of his actions, I couldn't afford to help him and that I couldn't trust him. George just sobbed and started apologizing for all he had done. I told him it was his kids he should be apologizing to. He kept sobbing and then told me there was another woman pregnant with his child. At first, I didn't believe him, but then he gave details and I looked her up on Facebook. There was a picture of them as the profile picture. I hung up on him, disgusted yet still feeling somewhat responsible for what he has become. A few days later, we heard from George again and he told us his trial was in 2 months. He sounded so scared, but part of me thought this was what he needed to learn consequences, though I felt disgusted by my thoughts since he's still my son who I raised. My husband and I decided to attend the trial even though it was in the next state. We felt we had to for our son's sake and our peace of mind. I told Susanna and Bethany about our decision and they were bewildered, declining to attend. At the trial, George was found guilty of all counts, including criminal damage, robbery, and failure to pay child support. The judge sentenced him to 6 years with no plea deal due to the evidence. I didn't know how to feel. My grandkids won't see their dad for 6 years. It's been 4 months since then, and I'm still confused. George calls daily, crying, apologizing, begging us to get him out and to speak to his kids, which I've declined since Susanna hasn't given permission. Bethany decided on no contact with him or her son. I haven't reached out to his other girlfriend either. I'm unsure how to feel about that. This has been depressing, but I'm glad I updated. Thank you for reading. This is probably my last post. I hope we can recover and heal from this. This final post was made in the pro-revenge subreddit by a user named Forest Cabin. The post is titled, "Karen ends up looking like a pauper at her own wedding. I have known Pat for decades. As far as I can remember, she was fixated on having 5 children and a picket fence dream life. I slowly cut ties with her in college because she was an opportunist and I didn't trust her. She is both manipulative and forceful. Her idea of cute rubs me the wrong way. Pat likes to walk like a penguin when she wants to elicit pity, and she usually does this when she wants to evoke the underdog narrative. I've never seen someone act so despicably and ridiculously at the same time. I moved on with my life and happily got rid of her for years. Pat eventually found me on Facebook and I accepted her friend request out of politeness. Pat has become the epitome of a permissive mother. Her 5 kids do as they please and she never calls them out. She tried to force a relationship between me and her daughters, making them call me auntie. Pat even attempted to drop them at my house uninvited. Her phone calls were insistent. She tried to monopolize my time and began showing up at my job. I created some boundaries, so she tried to find loopholes. It was a nightmare. My husband and I hosted a party for the community center's new members. The community center is actually a very informal initiative, and my husband and I mainly serve the homeless population. We prefer to help strangers instead of catering to potentially narcissistic acquaintances. We don't mind lending a hand, but we have encountered truly dishonest choosing beggars. There are other services available, such as one member who helps women get their wedding and prom dresses for free. The community center's headquarters is actually a farm owned by an elderly couple. There is a barn, a venue, and a very nice green field with an artificial lake and some fowl. They charge for the use of their facilities, but not for community-oriented events. Pat had always been salty at her husband for demanding that she go back to work after baby number 3 while he worked 3 jobs. She demanded he get her pregnant to fulfill her dream of having 5 kids. He didn't agree because he was already nearly 45 and felt like he might never be able to retire. She got away with bringing new babies into this world anyway. Her fascination with being pregnant comes from all the attention she gets. She had at least 1 miscarriage between each child. Pat latched onto our group and never missed any of our activities. I hated having her in my house, but it was an open invitation that included virtually everyone, and she was very active as an event organizer. I didn't like the way her kids behaved. We have a designated area for parties and entertainment, but her kids ended up inside my bedroom. We ended up having to keep watch over them and enjoyed none of our own party. I called her days later to express my concerns about their overall behavior, but she completely cut me off and began talking about herself. She said her kids wanted to come visit again and use our pool, which I never answered because I didn't want to say, "No, I will not have your brats over." She also called me as summer was approaching specifically to let me know her middle daughter was bored and wanted to spend a week at our home. I politely declined, citing that my husband and I had to work and could not entertain guests. Pat paid no heed. Her child called me on the weekend, calling me auntie and attempting to coax me by saying, "Mom says you invited me to spend summer with you." I quickly clarified and offered an explanation to avoid hurting the child's self-esteem. Never mind, her daughter just hung up on me. Pat's Facebook also showed some red flags. Some cryptic rants here and there were visible, along with friends' comments and complaints about how she asked a particular person to watch her kids for only a couple of hours but ended up leaving them all day. Another friend criticized her girls' night out because Pat had just asked them to be patient and wait until she could pay back some money she owed them, yet she had money to spend on Friday night outings. I thought those very public comments on private matters were more like a cry of lost patience. Unpleasant things began to happen, like the time she volunteered to wrap Christmas presents for underprivileged kids. We all wanted to create a mix of less costly gifts with really nice ones. Surprisingly, some nice and eye-catching toys and games went missing but turned up under her Christmas tree. No one could prove anything, but it was infuriating. Or the time my daughter called me in tears to pick her up after attending Pat's daughter Casey's birthday party. My daughter had been ignored all night because she didn't gift Casey the expensive gaming stuff that Casey practically demanded. My daughter did ask, but I said no. We would buy her a very nice and thoughtful present according to her taste. So when I went to pick her up, my daughter was sitting alone in the living room while Casey and her friends stayed outside. Stories about Pat and her family multiplied. The owners of the farm decided to keep their gates locked unless they had guests or events because Pat got into the habit of driving in whenever she pleased. It was either her kids screaming and disturbing ongoing weddings, throwing rocks at the koi in the lake, or harassing the geese in the yard. There was also the incident where she stiffed another soccer mom with the lunch bill and then played the financially struggling card. Other parents began to dislike her because she created unnecessary hostile competition. When my daughter turned 13, I allowed her to wear my grandma's ring. It's not an expensive piece of jewelry, but it's vintage, and girls nowadays want to look boho. My granny gave it to me when I became a teenager, so I passed it on to my daughter so she could wear it during her birthday week. It was strange that she became quiet and distracted after that. She also didn't want to go to school, which made my husband and me suspicious. She never opened up, and my other kids had no clue. We went to her school, but her teachers assured us that nothing had changed in her environment. My husband and I suspected she was being bullied, but our daughter gave us no tools to support her. She is very sunny and compassionate. She has never had any problems with other kids. I called her best friend's mom for more information. Natalie, my kid's BFF, told us what was going on. Casey and my daughter had become close. close. I knew this and wasn't too thrilled. I found the age gap not exactly inappropriate, but I'd rather see my daughter spend time with friends in the same age range. Casey is very beautiful and a gifted student, but she is also very conceited. To make a long story short, Casey asked my daughter if she could try on the ring and then refused to give it back. She later claimed that she lost it but would look for it, which left my daughter distraught. My daughter kept asking for her ring, and as a result, Casey shunned her and spread the word that my kid was trying to steal her ring. Some kids at school took Casey's side, so now Casey wore my daughter's jewelry to school as if nothing happened. If that doesn't qualify as taunting, I don't know what does. My guilt comes from not being able to get my daughter to open up and feel safe telling me the truth. When I talked to her, she burst into tears. I felt both pained as a mother and furious that some teenage brat was doing this under our noses. I went straight to Pat's car after school. I asked to talk as Casey was about to go in. I grabbed Casey's hand and asked to see her jewelry. Casey froze and tried to make a fist, so I became relentless. Casey yelled, "Mom," and Pat struggled to get out of the car. I slid the ring off. At first, Pat yelled at me. After I confronted her with the engraving on the band, she argued that it had been loaned to her daughter by my kid. Then she claimed she bought it. I paid no heed. I warned them that I knew Casey had become an abusive friend to my daughter. Pat called me to tell me off. She said she was trying to raise an assertive young woman and that I had just messed that up by being overbearing. She never apologized for her thieving child. Pat's husband, Hank, is what can be described as a doormat. Pat wore him down to a nub. He had no choice but to obey her to keep the peace. She was a bully who actively withdrew affection when he didn't follow her wishes, even in public. As a result, she managed to have kids 4 and 5 after a relentless campaign that included leaving him for 2 months. Her pregnancies were a nuisance because she expected to be treated like the only woman who has ever been pregnant. She strolled around in a wheelchair almost immediately after getting pregnant and would get very sick on weekends. So her kids were often sent to friends and family so that she could rest. Pat systematically bullied Hank. She would leave town and take the kids with her. Poor Hank would look distraught, drinking on his porch, or just appearing really lonely. This is how she got off the hook and was able to leave her job. Hank had virtually no voice, so he struggled to keep the marriage together. Everyone liked him, but hated her equally. Hank loved talking to other people, but seemed concerned that Pat would be upset. Over time, according to my husband, Hank began to show signs of depression and mental distress. Our friend Lena runs the Wedding Prom Dress Initiative. It's not complicated. Dresses are sourced from donations, eBay, trunk shows, etc. Unusually beautiful dresses are retained so that more than one bride gets to wear them. In some cases, a bride will pay $50, but most of the time, the dresses are donated. Pat was involved in this initiative. Lena kept her on because they never had any issues and her task was limited to just shipping the dresses out. However, when Pat decided to renew her vows, her bridezilla attitude became the icing on the cake. For starters, she bullied another couple into giving up their wedding date at the farm because she needed her renewal to match her exact wedding date. They were not impressed with her harassment and booked another venue instead. As a result, the farm owners were angry because Pat was already costing them money after she had successfully negotiated a cut in their rate because she couldn't afford it but would repay them by doing maintenance work around the venue. Pat became attached to a particular dress that was already assigned to another bride. Lena made it clear that Pat would need to pay for her own dress, so Pat played it cool and shipped the wrong gown instead. She was adamant that it was the right dress despite all the notes on Lena's agenda. The other bride was truly gracious about it. She was obviously disappointed but never made a scene. What bothered me most is that I picked that dress and bought it for $40 at a garage sale. It was a vintage dress, ankle length, white with lots of lace, and a huge bargain. Again, when confronted, Pat did a Casey and used the "this is mine" strategy. We felt so bad for the other bride that we did our best to get her something nice to wear. The other bride was a true fighter. She had pulled herself out of welfare, earned her high school diploma, and was working to get on her feet by trying to earn a certificate as an acrylic nail technician. So her reward was to have some Karen steal her dress. Pat never admitted to messing up, but just by the fact that she claimed it was her dress, we knew. Lena never allowed Pat in her warehouse again. Their last phone fight ended with Pat bringing up the other bride's past and saying, "This conversation is over, it's my dress and you are mistaken." That was weeks before the other bride's wedding. Pat went all out on her wedding decor. She spent way too much. She hired a caterer for some food, but the wedding invitation included a request for specific dishes for her Sunday brunch wedding. Either she ran out of banquet money or was in complete moocher mode. I picture the penguin walking around, practically asking everyone to supply her wedding reception grub, and I cringe. There is nothing wrong with potluck weddings. In fact, they can be a nice addition to a cozy, family-oriented wedding reception. But don't you need to at least be close to your guests in order to ask for such a thing? Even I got an invitation. I told everyone I wasn't going because I was very uncomfortable being told what to bring and was probably expected to give them a cash gift on top of that. Some of the older ladies in our group agreed. Others said they wouldn't decline in advance because she is a bully and they didn't want a confrontation. Lena called me the night before Pat's re-wedding. Lena was there to close the Saturday night bingo, and Pat was awfully friendly, but that's what she does whenever things are going her way. Lena peeked into the garment bag and saw the exact same dress while Pat was caught up supervising the wedding decorations. The thing with Karens is that they expect everyone to suck it up or make their dreams come true, or they simply underestimate everyone and think we are all fools. Lena is a very straightforward person with a so sue me attitude. She told me she would just ruin the dress. After all, it was hers, so she could do whatever she wanted. If Pat wanted to take legal action and if things got ugly, she would need to prove ownership. However, the dress was the same. The marks inside the hem and the tags were identical. Even the tag numbers that were punched to identify each dress for logistics purposes matched. Pat had the dress altered, adding some extra beading and dyeing it to a deep cream color, but it was obviously the same garment. Lena and I snuck in before the venue closed for the night. All brides are allowed to stay in a small bedroom for a small charge, so they don't have to drive in on their wedding day. Honestly, the makeshift chapel was gorgeous. I don't know how she paid for it, but it was full of flowers and presumptuous details. I naively brought in some ink to spill on the dress, but Lena said she wanted something more awful, like a nasty surprise. Ink would be too obvious, and if Pat saw it ahead of time, she might be able to snag another gown from somewhere. No, the ideal thing was to have her trust that the dress was fine. So Lena locked herself in a bathroom stall and completely cut out the back panel. She patiently put it back on its hanger and zipped up the bag. We left through the emergency door with the back of the dress stuffed inside Lena's purse. I absolutely hate people who target and steal from anyone they calculate to be in a weaker position. The wedding was scheduled for 9 a.m. Pat called me at 7 a.m., but I ignored her calls. I picked up by 8 a.m., both curious and wondering if she suspected anything. Pat was frantic. She was crying that her dress was missing by half. I purposely made her explain being annoyingly dense and continually interrupting her like she does, stalling the conversation. She asked me if I could lend her my wedding dress. I said no, sorry. Then she asked if I would help her get a dress. I was satisfied to remind her that the town's bridal shops were closed on Sunday and that the others that would open were almost an hour away. The farm is already nearly an hour away from our town. If Pat could get a shop to rent a dress, she would need to try it on and get it steamed. Even if the dress was ready to wear, it would easily take more than 2 hours. She tried to ask me to go pick a dress for her. Even if a shop were open and brought her a dress, it would add to the cost. Also, these shops open at 10 or 9:30 at the earliest. By the time they got to her, it would be time to wrap up the wedding because she needed to clear the venue by 12 o'clock for the next event. She broke down and mumbled some incoherent stuff I didn't understand. Pat then hung up on me and called Lena instead. She asked Lena to bring her anything she had available. Lena and I ended up delivering the most outdated, moss-smelling, oversized dress. Pat's disappointment was a mix of anger and emotion. She also tried to wear her knee-length silk bridal slip as a wedding dress, but it looked too obvious and really cheap. She attempted to get her daughter to give her own dress to wear, which had an open back zipper due to fitting issues, but Casey refused, asking if she was supposed to attend the wedding naked. The dress needed a petticoat to plump up the skirt, which wasn't available, so it dragged all over the floor, and Pat had to keep pulling it up. She walked down the aisle with one hand on her bouquet and the other grabbing her dress. The dress looked limp and awkward with the arrangements of pins that caused the sleeves and neckline to pucker into messy rims. She spent the ceremony looking uncomfortable and out of place. Very few people attended, but that wasn't part of any revenge. It was just how people reacted to her entitled attitude. The dress looked awful. The reception portion of the wedding had all this princely decoration, a very nice cake, and a bridezilla in a dress from hell. I didn't stay, but I was told that she was so disappointed she spent her wedding sulking. There was no dance and no actual speech. She had to change into a shirt and leggings because the dress was too uncomfortable. Everyone talked about how Pat put on her flip-flops and walked around aimlessly until she ordered the ushers to start folding up the chairs within 1 hour of the reception. So she practically kicked everyone out, and the cake was never cut. Pat wasn't the same after this. She became quieter and avoided everyone. I think she was disappointed that nobody ran to her rescue, not even her family who came from out of town. Her husband finally cracked under all the pressure and sought some help. He was slaving away and coming home to clean the house while Pat used her kids as an excuse to spend like crazy. Hank also had to help with the kids' homework because Pat never had the time or patience. She also refused to get a part-time job so her kids could attend after-school programs and get help with their schoolwork. Therapy seemed to help Hank because the last time Pat left with her kids, he didn't seem distraught. He was riding his bicycle and appeared more relaxed while mowing his lawn. Hank told my husband that he had contemplated suicide after their 3rd child. When Pat returned, he maintained the routine, but became interested in going out by himself and doing things for himself. We began to see Pat alone all the time. Hank was seen less and less in the same car and eventually moved in with his parents. He filed for divorce on the grounds of emotional cruelty, but I don't think he won. Instead, there was some sort of settlement or agreement that she would not get close to or interact with him unless it had to do with the kids. I also don't know if Pat even suspected who or what happened to her dress. She slowly pulled away from the community center and became less active in social gatherings. Pat also removed me from her Facebook as well as most everyone else from school and the center. User BLTLC said, "I hate to see men like Hank taken advantage of. You can see the dimming in their eyes as time slowly erodes the excuses they've created for why their partner's wants come before their own needs and well-being. I'm glad Hank got out. If left to a parasite like Pat, she would have pushed him to his breaking point and played his death for pity from the community, as if she had no idea how he fell into overwhelming misery, until she realized her unreasonable standard of living would have died with him. Only then do I believe she would understand the true loss of a man like Hank. OP, I feel that you and Lena may have had a hand in saving Hank's life since your actions precipitated a reality check that notably pulled Pat's impositions back, perhaps even enough for Hank to consider an option other than death to escape her abuse. I'm not trying to conflate revenge with heroism, but I don't believe Pat would have stopped her course of action without this rare public disappointment in her life in which she ran out of people, except her own self, to whom she could point blame and bully. Maybe on that day, mocking his first commitment to Pat, Hank saw that her happiness was not rooted enough in him for her to even stop sulking because she didn't get the pretty dress she felt she deserved. This shows that the occasion was not enough about their relationship. Perhaps on that day, Hank realized how not even family sacrificed more than they reasonably should and how few people even voluntarily wanted to gather for her. Maybe on that day, Hank started noticing others expressing feelings he had not previously allowed himself to entertain. Dutiful men often deny themselves the thought of dissent, for better or worse. In the end, I'm happier for Hank's improvement than for any schadenfreude concerning Pat. I know neither of them, and I recognize I've made enormous assumptions in my post, but this is the moral I've decided to take from your story. Abusers hurt more people than we realize, and we can't just leave abuse to its own devices. Thank you for sharing, OP.